Now, this philosophy that we're talking about, all aspects of it, among other things, can impact racism and sexism. Every quarter at our company, we have what we call the People Builders meeting. We recognize the outstanding people in our company. We always bring in a corporate client who tells us what our training has meant to them. We had a lady named Gloria Hogg with Tri-Cities Hospital who was our guest speaker on one of the occasions. One of those rainy days, traffic was heavy, she was a little late getting there. And she walked in laughing and smiling and cracking jokes, and the trainers who had been working with her, ran up to them and she grabbed them and hugged them and they kidded a moment, and then Gloria came on and she kept popping jokes to the group that was there. Then all of a sudden, Gloria came to a dead stop and she said, I don't know if you knew it or not, but you're listening to what was at one time an overt racist person. She said, if you were not black, I couldn't wait to get on to you and attack you verbally. Now, being dark brown, that didn't help. Being yellow didn't help. Got to be black, otherwise I was after you. And she said, I've always believed in the golden rule, but I certainly was not living it. But as this training started having an impact that you can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want, she said, I realized that made nothing but sense. It's nothing new. It's the old golden rule handled in a slightly different verbiage. And she said, I started going by that thing. And she said, I've never been happier. And for what it's worth, the governor of Texas recognized her as one of the 100 outstanding women of distinction in Texas. She had a significant promotion at Tri-Cities. In addition to that, the rest of her change, every morning at 5:30, she gets up and goes out and gives insulin shots. One to a white lady, one to an African-American lady, and one to an Hispanic lady. Once a month, she draws the name of a senior citizen out of a hat and pays that person's electricity bill for the month. She said it gives her a great deal of joy and satisfaction. She said, why shouldn't I do it? I've got a wonderful job, and a lot of people simply do not have those things. Does this work? It works because it's intellectually sound, it's psychologically right, and it's the golden rule in action. It takes you away from what's in it for me to what can I do for you. A few months later, Elva Gonzalez, also at Tri-Cities, was our guest. When she started with this philosophy, she was a file clerk. Today she heads 3 departments. Her 10-year-old son was short. He was a runner. He wanted to qualify for this big meet down in Austin. They started training and practicing. Only one person here in the whole Dallas area could qualify. His friend said, you're too short. She took what she had learned in this approach to life and kept telling him, if you work hard enough and believe you can, I believe that you can. Bottom line, with 13 states competing, this youngster finished 4th in the entire 13 states. From time to time, people say to me, you changed my life. I'm always flattered when something like that happens. But I got to tell you, they got it wrong. I did not change their life. The reality is we have some principles and some philosophies that are absolutely ironclad. They will work. But it is your choice. Do you put them to work? If you take the philosophy, put it to work, that's what changes your life. Not Zig Ziglar, not anybody else. It is what you do. It's a do-it-yourself job. Now, as you probably notice, I get a lot of the heart involved in what I'm talking about. I get you emotionally involved. I used to talk about giving you a checkup from the neck up. I now believe in giving people a checkup from the heart up. You see, I go through the mind because that's the gateway to the heart. But when you change hearts, that's when lives are changed. But all change starts with a start. My friend Joe Saba puts it this way. You don't have to be great to start, but you got to start to be great. If relationships are important, how do you get people to like you? You know, in a nutshell, how do you get people to like? How can you become more likable? In other words, the more likable you are, does it make sense that you'll have more friends and you'll do better on the job and other places? Does that make any sense to any of you in the live audience there? How many of you believe the boss really will promote somebody they like, everything else being equal? Can I say it? Maybe sometime not even everything else being equal. Roger Ailes, in an article in Personal Selling Power, says that what others think about you influences what you think about you. And he says it only takes another person 7 seconds to decide really what they think about you. And from that point on, all of their decisions are made largely influenced by that first impression. And so that first impression is important. And every decision they make from then on is influenced to a degree because of that. Now, first impressions are important. And a lot of people start forming impressions before you ever open your mouth. One evening, the redhead and I were at our favorite ice cream parlor. This was several years ago before I discovered that my body retains ice cream. And we were having our ice cream, and a young man and his girlfriend walked in. I nudged the redhead. I said, "Look at that, sweetheart." She said, "I see him." I said, "I wonder what happened to him." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, look at him. He's hurt. He's been in some kind of an accident." "Oh, honey," she said, "he's not hurt. He's been to the barber shop or the beauty shop." I said, "Are you trying to tell me that he paid money for somebody to make him look like that?" She said, "Yeah, honey," said, "it happens all the time. In my lifetime, I have never seen before or since a sight like I witnessed right there." This young man, I can describe it this way. It looked like to me that the governor's pardon had gotten to the warden about 10 seconds after he plugged in the chair. I mean, hair was all over the place. Except there was one peak going straight up, and it must have had 2 cans of hairspray on it. I'm telling you, if you'd fallen on it, you'd have been hurt. I mean, it was bad. It was green and purple and yellow and orange. I mean, it was really something. Now wait a minute. Don't anybody sit there listening to this live audience, and don't you, as you listen to this tape, think I'm being critical. I am not. I'm not being judgmental. I'm just telling you what I saw. Now. And for what it's worth, I would literally go to war and fight for that young man's right to look exactly like he does. That is America. That's what freedom is all about. You bet I'd fight for his right to look like that. But I wouldn't give him a job. And you know what's so unfortunate about that? He might be absolutely brilliant, extremely well educated, extremely creative, very, very capable. But with 98% of the people in America who have jobs to offer, he'll never get even the interview. You see, opinion has already been formed, and that opinion influences from there on in. Since your likability is important, what are some of the characteristics of the likable person? Think about, and I want you to do this, take 3 people in your own mind that you really like. I mean, you just really like them. You're attracted to them. What are the things that you really like about them? It'd probably start the temporary favorable impressions. The smile the person had would be important. Their appearance, as we've talked about, they're friendly, personable, optimistic. Their manners, if they have a sense of humor, if they're good listeners, if they're complimentary, and now if they're non-smokers. You know, those are things that you kind of automatically first off notice. Now, over a permanent basis, integrity, common sense, if they're dependable and loyal and caring, and sincere and fair and consistent and committed. In other words, that's not the description of a fair weather friend. As you know, a fair weather friend's always there when he needs you. Now, that's not the kind of person that you really, want to have a long-term relationship with. Now, the qualities I've just identified are the qualities we've already talked about in this series. All of which, by now, you recognize that you do have those qualities and you can use them. You notice, of course, I'm using mostly words in all of this. When Mark Twain was a cub reporter, He was told by his editor that he must not report anything that he could not validate, that he had not seen, and that he knew for absolute certain was right. So he went to this occasion, and here's the report he wrote. A woman giving the name of Mrs. James Jones, who is reported to be one of the society leaders of the city, is said to have given what purported to be a party yesterday to a number of alleged ladies. The hostess claims to be the wife of a reputed attorney. Now, you know, when you put that together, it makes you realize that sometimes we can stretch things a little bit too far. Now, what are the advantages, ladies and gentlemen, of being likable? Well, people who like you generally trust you. And they won't lie to you. They won't deceive you. You can pretty well count on that being true if they really like you. Number two, they want to do business with you, and so they will be more than fair. They want to help you expand your business. If they like you, don't we like to help our friends? They want to do things for you. They might even invite you to play around the golf with them or go to dinner with them or something. Now, being the right kind of person is the key. What's your objective in wanting to be likable and have all of those friends? One of the things you've heard me say several times in the series, you got to be before you can do. You've got to do before you can have. And that is so incredibly important. So let's look at the motive. Is it motivation, manipulation, or leadership? Motivation is when you try to get somebody to do something for their own good. Manipulation is when you try to get somebody to do something for your own good. Leadership is when you try to get somebody to take an action that will benefit both of you. Eisenhower said leadership was the ability to persuade somebody else to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And what do they want to do? Things that are in their own best interest. That's what people really want to do. I saw a young man with a T-shirt on, and the T-shirt said, "I follow no one." And I thought to myself, what a tragedy, because he will never lead anyone either with that kind of an attitude. You treat people like you see them. This has a direct bearing on the relationship. And the way you treat them influences their opinion of you and how well you get along with them. My friend Louis Timberlake from Austin does a lot of speaking. He was invited to speak to a particular school meeting up in Brooklyn, New York, several years ago. And the occasion they were honoring a teacher who had been in retirement about 10 years, and they had to call her back to assist. They had a class of boys there that, to put it mildly, were slightly out of control. In the first 6 weeks of school, they had run 7 teachers off. It was in desperation that they called her back. And they said to her, "We're going to put a policeman in there so that nothing will happen." She looked at the list of boys. She said, "Hey, you don't have to worry about that." She said, "I love to teach boys. I've never had any trouble." They said, "Yeah, but you've been out of the system for 10 years and there have been some changes made." She said, "Oh, don't give it a thought." Said, "I love boys. Won't have any trouble." They said, "Well, we'll at least put an assistant in there." Hey, I don't need any help at all. I can handle these boys." It was a marvelous year, a wonderful experience. As a matter of fact, she was Teacher of the Year that year. Had this banquet. They called in a lot of the celebrities. Lewis was called in to address them. And they were singing all of these praises to this teacher. And she just sat there terribly embarrassed. And when she finally got up to speak, she said, "This makes me feel very bad because I didn't do anything at all." Said, "Anybody could have done this." Why, she said, "When I looked at that roster and I went right down the list, Alice Anderson, 137, Bill Brooks, 136, Charlie Carter, 135. She said, "When I saw the IQs of these kids," she said, "I knew beyond any doubt I was going to have a wonderful year." They told her what had happened. Those were their locker numbers. Now, how many of you think those kids love that teacher? Can I see your hand? She treated them with courtesy and respect and had high expectations. That's why they loved her. Now, who you are determines how you deal with people. See, she was confident in her ability as a teacher. She knew she had some raw material that would be marvelous students, and so she was able to do a big job. Relationships are important. Who you know makes a difference in your life, and who you know is the difference in your eternity. When we look at relationships, when we understand what influence people have on us, we recognize that a lot of people influence. I put you in the center of the circle here. Certainly your family has had an impact on your life. Your teachers had an impact. Your employer and your employees, your friends have an influence. As a matter of fact, the people that you are with and around influence you. We know, for example, that if your child's friends are in drugs, the odds are 9 times as great that your child will get involved in drugs. You're impacted by the people around you. I know everybody here has noticed this. You can take a southern boy or girl and send them up north. It's just a question of time before they'll pick up an accent. I see that you have noticed that. Or you can take a northern boy or girl and send them down south, and pretty soon we'll have them talking normally. I mean, you're influenced by the people you are around. Certainly your faith has an impact on you. Your associates have an impact on you. The television, radio, and newspapers have an impact on you. And the books, tapes, magazines, and seminars that you read and listen to have an impact on you. Ultimately, those who are closest to me will determine my level of success. Los Angeles Times did a study several years ago, and they learned that the people who had made it big in this particular study, the people who had done the most with their life, at one point in their life made a definite decision to associate with the people that would further their careers. In other words, people of high moral character, people who had ambition, people who were sound in their character, people who were going places. They deliberately chose to associate with people. Now, sometimes on the job that's not possible, but your free time, your time away from the job, you can definitely choose your associates, and that is so important. Let's look at some of the things that we can do that will make a difference in our own lives. How can we increase our own motivation? Well, I was reading something this week about a book, Emotional Intelligence, written by Daniel Goleman. You see, there are certain success factors that can't always be measured. We can measure your IQ, but he has something here called emotional intelligence. And he says, and I'll read what he simply says, it's crucial to your contentment, your career success, your marriage, your family life, and your children. An abundance of qualities of emotional intelligence lead to greater drive, self-discipline, caring, and cooperation. Well, the question is, what is emotional intelligence? He identifies it. The hallmarks of emotional intelligence are the ability to know what you and those around you are feeling, and to handle those feelings accordingly. Sensitivity is what we're talking about. He says this is a different way of being smart. He goes ahead to say that an abundance of the qualities that make for emotional intelligence lead to greater drive and self-discipline, caring, and cooperation, all of which makes our lives better and our streets safer. Those high in emotional abilities tend to be poised, outgoing, and cheerful. They have a strong commitment of people or causes, to taking responsibility, and to an ethical outlook. They are sympathetic with others. Their emotional lives are rich. In short, they're comfortable with themselves and the people around them. How well they handle emotional life determines their life destiny every bit as much as does their IQ. Now let me pause, and they say self-praise is half scandal. But as old Dizzy Dean used to say, you know, if you done it, it ain't bragging. You have already noticed now, I only read this last week. But as you listen again to those 4 tapes that precede this one in this recorded series, you will discover that the qualities he's talking about we have already identified and spelled out. Now, what about that? Now, how did it happen? Well, when you got 3 sources, psychological, physiological, and theological, things like that just happen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about something here that to me is incredibly exciting. Goldman says if you want a happy, enduring marriage, your EQ, not your IQ, can make the difference. Decades of marital research shows that it is how a couple handles emotional flashpoints, the hurts and irritations inevitable in any intimate relationship, that determines whether the marriage will last. The brightest among us can be emotional morons. Well, now that's pretty direct, isn't it? Okay. The most stable unions are among couples who have found ways to air differences without escalating into personal attacks or retreating into stony silence. You'll never be rude with anyone you respect. That's the reason in my series on courtship after marriage, I emphasize so much, make a friend out of your mate. Now, you might say something mean, nasty, and ugly to your husband or wife, but you're not going to say anything mean, nasty, and ugly to your best friends. You just don't do that. And that is why this is so important. They have mastered elements of emotional intelligence like empathy, listening without defensiveness, and criticizing without contempt or character assassination. It really boils down, ladies and gentlemen, to claiming and using the qualities we have already identified in the series. Now, what's the base upon which so much of life is built? It's hope. Now, as you can see, I'm spelling hope a little differently than most people spell it. But the word hope is a significant word. It's the spirit. It is to the spirit what oxygen is to the brain. Again, John Maxwell, I remind you, says if there's hope in the future, there is power in the present. What is hope? It's an honest optimism based on personal and people effort and encouragement. Adler says that hope is the foundational quality of any change. And what's the foundational quality of hope? What does hope need? It needs nourishment, it needs feeding, and it needs it on a regular basis. Now, encouragement keeps that hope alive. Encouragement then becomes the basic component of change in our lives. Now, to tie this together, I received in the mail the other day, and this fascinates me a great deal. I don't even know who sent it to me. But it was a paper that was produced for counselors, written by C.R. Snyder, and it's conceptualizing, measuring, and nurturing hope. Now, they had some psychological mumbo-jumbo, as I would call it. That's anything I don't clearly understand, I call it mumbo-jumbo, and that's what a lot of it was. But then it gets down to the nitty-gritty, and here's what he said. Hope is the process of thinking about our goals and the way to achieve those goals. Hear this. Higher hope individuals report more mental energy and pathways for their goals, especially when there are blocks to those goals. To paraphrase somebody, he said, when the going gets tough, the hopeful keep going. High hope people undertake their goals where they focus on succeeding and see roadblocks to these goals as being a normal part of life. It's going to happen. We've already talked about that 3 or 4 times. High hope people have better outcomes in their lives. They have more goals, more difficult goals, greater success in achieving their goals. They see their goals as challenges, have greater happiness and less distress, have superior coping skills, recover better from physical injury, and report less burnout at work. That's the reason I've said in every one of these recordings, you listen again, and you listen again, and you listen again. Anytime you need that word of encouragement, then you need to listen again. And if you will listen, I get so amused at people and puzzled and frustrated. I've been told 29,286 times thereabout over the years. You know, when I get a little bit down, Zig, I'll pop in one of your tapes, and man, it always give me a little lift. And I say, well, why in heaven's name do you wait till you get down? Why don't you put it in there all the time? And you won't have to. You know, it's harder to get up than it is to stay up. And I think everybody here can certainly relate to that. Now, Snyder says hope is not synonymous with intelligence, nor is it the same as being optimistic. It is more. High hope often assures the person of success in reaching goals. High intelligence may only give a person a chance. What about that? And you know what he said at the end? Hope is ultimately counterproductive in the extent to which individuals pursue their goals to maximize their outcome to the comparative detriment of other people. Did you hear that? It's negative if it's achieved at the detriment of somebody else. You cannot climb the ladder of success on the backs of others. It just can't happen. If you're going to win it all, we've talked about living well and finishing well. We've talked about the fact that we can move from stability to success and from success to significance. We talked about what do you do in order to survive to even get to the stability part there. Now, the neat thing about all of this is what this really enables you to do is it enables you to take more control of your life. You see, the basic problem in our life is we have so many people who are confused between personal growth and self-fulfillment. Self-fulfillment is the Dead Sea. It takes in lots of water, gives out nothing. It is dead. The River Jordan, for every drop of water it takes in, it gives out. The River Jordan is alive and well. People who are givers are alive and well. The teacher who learns things so they can teach is a much happier individual. And I'm not talking about a classroom teacher alone. All of us are teachers. The person who learns so they can teach others is a much happier individual than is the one who learns so they can show up on one of the television talk shows and answer some of those trivia questions there. The personal growth individual is learning so that everybody is going to benefit as a result of it. Now, think with me, if you will. Suppose everybody in your family and everybody in your company were to adopt the attitudes we've been talking about throughout this series of tapes. I wonder what would happen. Yeah, I know this involves change, and change, sometimes is painful, but then, as I've said earlier, so is unemployment. And then so is a bankruptcy also, And a lot of times I've had to explain, people change when it's to their advantage. They change when they believe they can. They change when they have a plan of action, and they change when they can really see the possibilities and benefits for the future. But it takes training. Sometimes somebody said, well, why should I train my employees and then lose them? Well, one thing worse than training employees and losing them is not training them and keeping them. Now, that gets to be very, very expensive. Okay? Let me make it personal. We've got 60 people that are on our staff. 20 of them are salespeople. They bring in money. Okay? Very important people. The other 40 don't sell anything. But every person I've got there, every one of those 40 are completely capable of killing a sale. I mean, our switchboard operators can do it, our shipping department can do it, our accounting department can do it, our collection department. Now the question is, which one of the groups should I train? Absolutely. See, we can measure what it costs to train somebody. There's no way we can measure what it costs not to train, because we don't know how much business they might run off. Now, the leadership objective, and we're talking relationships now, is to have every person on the payroll thinking about my company and our company, not that company or the company. Because I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, everybody is important. Now, what would happen if every child in America were raised on the concepts we're talking about? What would happen if we adopt what I call the immigrant's attitude? I've talked about that in every recording thus far. I caught a cab in New Orleans several years ago. I'd been at a convention down there and headed back to the airport, and the driver was obvious to me he was not from Mobile, Alabama. So I said to him, sir, where are you from? He said, I'm from Nigeria. How long you been in America? 12 years. Have you had a chance to get an education since you've been here? And he said, oh, yes. He said, as a matter of fact, I get my Ph.D. in November. And he said, my wife has already gotten her master's. I said, well, my goodness alive, how'd you happen to come to America? And he said, well, when I was 5 years old, first day of kindergarten, they gave me an assignment, had to go home, needed help, and I learned that day that my parents were both illiterate. And he said, as a 5-year-old, I determined I was going to get an education. I said, 5 years old, that's awfully young to make that kind of decision. He said, yes, but I was so hurt by my parents' embarrassment that they couldn't help me. I determined that would never happen to me. A few years later, I decided to come to America. And I said, well, have you supported your family? And he said, well, as you can see, I'm driving a taxi. But he said, I've been a night watchman. I've loaded trucks. I've unloaded trucks. He said, I've been a tutor. I have dug graves. He said, I've done everything humanly possible, including being a tutor, in order to put bread on the table, and my wife has worked just as hard as I have. And I said, do you have any children? He said, yes, they're 4, 6, 8, and 10. I said, well, I bet they're good students too, aren't they? He said, well, the 3 that are in school are all honor students. And I said, well, what are you going to do now? He said, well, when I get my PhD, it's in business and finance and economics. He said, I have a deal with a New York firm, a Wall Street firm. I'm going to work for them for 2 years, and then I'm going back where I have a very good job with the government. That's where I will be. Now, I can only imagine how many nights when he desperately had to fight sleep in order to stay awake to get his assignments. When a child would get sick and it demanded a lot of extra attention. The demands were absolutely critical on this man and this woman's life. But when they came to America, it was a dream fulfilled. They worked, and they worked awfully hard. Now for the rest of their life, they're going to have the benefits of that hard work. All these things we've been talking about, do they work? I want to share with you a couple of additional things, because the thing to maintain that the motivational momentum is going to be extremely important. As I talked about earlier, we need to run our day by the clock, our life with a vision. We need to be grateful for what happens in our life. Hans Selye says the healthiest of all human emotions is gratitude. Again, a cab driver. Houston, Texas, early one morning, headed for a breakfast, caught a cab. It was only about 3/4 of a mile, but they advised me not to walk that time since it was dark, in that particular area of town. I got in the van, and as always, I greet people with enthusiasm. I said, well, how you doing? And his verbatim answer was, praise God, I am in America. And I heard the daggonest sales talk on America in the next 10 minutes I have ever heard in my life. I'm telling you, it was absolutely incredible. Now, bottom line is this man had been a registered pharmacist, again, from Nigeria. He was more excited by far about being a cab driver in America and more grateful for the opportunity. He said, I will get my license to be a pharmacist here. But in the meantime, he said, I am having an absolutely wonderful time. I'm just so glad to be here. The more you express gratitude for what you have, the more you will have to express gratitude for. And it works the other way too. The more you gripe about the problems you got, my friend, I'll absolutely guarantee it, the more problems you will have to gripe about. The whiners of life, we hear them all the time. I'm so often tempted to carry cheese with me because I understand that wine and cheese, kind of go together, all right? Now, we need to express gratitude for our friends, our family, our job, our health, America. Again, the more you express gratitude for what you have, the more you will have to express gratitude for. We teach a 3-day course. It's called Born to Win. People come from all over the world. One of the men whom I'd been consulted with, psychiatrist Louis Cady, was with us a year or so ago. I get involved in, as you've noticed early on in this series, in a whole lot of self-talk, because that self-talk is so important. I've seen lives change. I've seen miracles happen as a direct result of it. Dr. Cady wrote me this card. He said the experience at Born to Win was one of a lifetime. And I've already started putting numerous ideas to work. And incidentally, this was April 12th, 1994, and he's finished his book now. You also sold me, and finally, despite my thick skull, on using the affirmation card, and the results thus far, this was just 5 days after he finished, have been almost frightening in their intensity and speed. But it is a frighteningly good way. What you say to yourself is so incredibly important. Most important opinion you have is the opinion you have of yourself. The most important conversation you will ever have is the conversation that you will have with yourself. When we look at the things we're talking about, I like to always emphasize that you need to be realistic and practical in the things that we do. I believe when I make statements and all, I believe I am being absolutely pragmatic. I love the story of the fellow that was in Tel Aviv. He was doing a tour of the Mann Center for the Performing Arts. The tour guide was really putting it on thick. I mean, it was a beautiful facility, granite and marble and the tapestries and the gold inlays and the incredible paintings and the acoustic. It was really something. And finally, one of the tourists said, well, I suppose this was named after Horace Mann, the famous author. And the tour guide said, no, it was named after Frederick Mann from Philadelphia. And the tourist said, Frederick Mann, don't believe I've ever heard of him. What did he write? The tour guide said, a check. Now that's being practical. That's being pragmatic. I'm pragmatic. I was in Atlanta. A young man picked me up to take me down to the hotel where I was to be speaking. And he was just going on and on about must be wonderful to have a company where your number one objective in life is to help people be all they can be. And I said, young man, I appreciate the accolades, but you got it wrong. That's not my number one objective. He said, it's not your number one objective? He said, what is your number one objective? I said, it's to make a profit. I said, Samuel Gompers, an early labor leader, says that the number one responsibility of a business is to make a profit. That's the only way you can stay in business. That's the only way those other 60 employees are going to have a job. It's the only way we can make a contribution to society. So our number one objective is to make a profit so we can hit our number one priority, which is to help people be all they can be. You see, there is that thing called the bottom line, and we learned several years ago you can do a great deal more with profit than you can loss. I don't know if any of you have noticed. How many have noticed that in your own life? You see, with integrity, you have nothing to fear because you have nothing to hide. And that is the most nerve-wracking thing at all. These people that, run from the law for years and finally get caught, they say almost across the board, what a relief. Your creativity is stifled. Your productivity is absolutely destroyed. It's absolutely astonishing. Now, we're talking about a different approach. I want to close this recording with a little story about the most moving event that's happened in my life since I've been doing this. And since I have been getting into the self-talk bit. You remember in an early recording, we did talk about the biblical promises that are tied directly to this. That the Bible really says you can be happier, you can be healthier, you can be more prosperous, you can be more secure, you can have more friends, you can have greater peace of mind, you can have those better family relationships, and yes, you can have the hope. Well, I got into the self-talk at a convention down in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this happened back in 1990. I spoke in early January there. About 6 weeks later, I got one of the most moving letters I've ever received from anybody. A mother was writing me, and she said, my daughter and I were in New Orleans. She took down and listed all the qualities of success. And every morning and every night, she stood in front of the mirror, and she claimed those. As a direct result of claiming these qualities, it led her back into the Bible. She made her peace with God, and on January 20th, 1990, she was killed in an automobile accident. But she is safe today. Now, friends, I got to tell you, when something like that happens, you get the chill bumps all over you, but those gratitude bumps really come out big. She's only 21 years old. I'm telling you, we're talking about some principles that absolutely are life-changing. They will be enormously beneficial. As I close this, let me simply say that with these attitudes we've been talking about, taking this approach, putting other people first, there are going to be certain people that are going to kind of laugh at you and say, man, you're different. But let me remind you, the little world laughed, but the big world gathered on the banks of the Hudson. when Fulton went steaming by. The little world laughed, but the big world was tuned in when Alexander Graham Bell completed that phone call. The little world laughed, but the big world was at Kitty Hawk when the Wright brothers took that first flight into the air, which changed forever the world we're in. Some people might laugh at some of the things we're suggesting that you do here, but I'm here to tell you the big world's going to be standing on the sidelines cheering you with incredible enthusiasm. And the big thing is, it's not what you get by reaching your destination. It's what you become by reaching that destination that is the important thing. Buy these ideas, take these steps, follow these procedures, because if you do, I will see you not just at the top. Hey, I'm going to see you over the top. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.